Sigeleli Africa, Maluparadisu Pondolayo, Israeli Tana Soyetu, Osi Sigelela China, Nusapolayo, Nulela Buluga Sichama Saesu. Usibuluke, sichamasa, Jesus, sichamasa, South Africa, South Africa.
Prof. Adebayo, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. I think we are 15 minutes late. We take it, we add it to read later, or we can overtake it on the way. Good morning, everyone. It gives me a great pleasure or honor to welcome you to this international symposium on inclusive city that will take place in Durban, South Africa on the 28th of June to 30th of June 2021. And the theme is achieving inclusive city through multidisciplinary approach. On behalf of the host, the Sashi Inclusive Cities, University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Development, School of Built Environment and Development Studies, and the chair of the Sashi, Professor Misha Shipungu. We welcome all of you to this particular symposium. The symposium comes at a very important time in the history of mankind, especially during this period of pandemic. And we know our city today are faced with various problems. The research and the debate on cities will be presented today. But what is important for us to take note of is a problem that the city faces in 21st century that we are not able to achieve inclusive cities, such as political ideology that create a divide and create city of apartheid, city segregation, segregation housing. Those are one of the key problems apart from the detailed areas of inclusive city, as well as religious differences, conflict. And we've seen that across the globe, that the conflict has destroyed most of the city. We cannot talk of inclusive city without not looking into that. The conflict problem also resulted in migration that creates a lot of other problems. But we must also look at the problem of environmental issue, the impact, the social exclusion. But all these things that we discuss about inclusive city, the human being must be in the center and the core of our debate. The symposium might learn lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, that everyone is affected and everyone will have to actively participate in solving the problem facing humanity. And this requires a collaborative effort, which is equally important in achieving inclusive city through your collaboration and your multidisciplinary approach. What makes you relevant today, symposium, is because of your wealth of knowledge. Everyone in this webinar is to participate, to interact, to share experience and idea, and develop a new knowledge that can be used in today's city in different dimensions in achieving inclusive city of the future. On that note, I think we may be able in this symposium, because of the paradigm shift that we live in, to develop a new methodology, development framework, and implementation strategy that includes sound management, finance, and political will. Not the less, we must recognize the threat of the city, the maintenance, which is, especially in Africa, is a malady of Africa, lack of maintenance. So those must be one of the key aspects that we need to look at if we are to achieve inclusive city. At the end of this 3-day symposium and the deliberation, I believe we will come out with a good outcome, conclusion, and recommendation that will be useful in creating and achieving inclusive city. On that note, I will introduce the host, and there are many other people that we're still going to present after me. Professor Shipungu will introduce the symposium. She is the chair of the SASHI. She's our host. She's an associate professor in town and regional planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Also, she's chief editor of Journal of Inclusive City. She has a numerous award, and her research at the moment focuses on Southern African cities. And also she served as in an advisory committee in the cities, and has got various publications to her name, both in local and international journal. And thereafter, we will move to Professor Kalema, Nsnene Kalema, who is the Dean of the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, University of KwaZulu-Natal. We give you the welcome address briefly. And Professor Kalema is an academic in various universities, and also he has published widely in various areas. And also Professor Kalema is a recipient of national and international teaching, research, and leadership award. And if you see from the bibliography that presented to us, she has received a lot of funding to carry out a large research in his portfolio. At the same time, Professor Kalema has published widely and has published both in national and international papers. Because of the time, I will only highlight key issue of each one of those people. And then the next person after him will be Dr. Subrati Monsami, who will be giving a topic on reaction on inclusive city in eThekwini in Durban, South Africa. She was a former head of planning, environmental and management unit, eThekwini Municipality, Durban in South Africa. Then Sitole will follow through with also CEO of South African City Network. And thereafter, I will come back to give you the introduction to the keynote speaker. Thank you. Can we have Professor Shipungu to come forward, please, and present and give us the introduction to the symposium?
Thank you very much, Professor Adebayo, and a warm welcome to all our guests, our delegates. We're really grateful. You could have been somewhere else, but you choose to be here, so we really appreciate that. Colleagues, you may be aware that the SACHI Chair for Inclusive Cities is currently the host, together with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, but we work with a number of organizations, municipalities, and of course, institutions. So the organizers for this event will include University of KwaZulu-Natal, SACHI Chair for Inclusive Cities, University of Venda, University of Johannesburg, eThekwini Municipality, SACPLAN, South Africa City Networks, National Research Foundation, and of course, it's endorsed by ISOCOP. Colleagues, I'm speaking with you today in the midst of the crisis that we all are aware of. Pandemics have sent a shockwaves across the globe. People are worried about their lives and livelihood. Governments all over the world are trying by all means to come up with means, strategies to curb the spread of the virus. In South Africa now, as of today, we are now in level 4. Grants are put in place, new policies are put in place to try to address the issues around the impact of COVID. It's also common knowledge, therefore, that urban centers are seen as the epicenter for pandemic. It is estimated that about 90% of the cases that we have of coronavirus are actually in urban areas. And it has also been widely documented that poor infrastructure, housing, among others, also play a significant role in the high transmission of the virus. COVID has exposed our high inequalities within South Africa and other countries. The gap between the poor and the rich has widened up. Our cities are more unequal than before. We can all see that. Colleagues, you can all agree with me that issues within urban spaces or cities are complicated issues, sophisticated, and they cannot be addressed by one discipline because they are not discipline specific. Therefore, they are interlinked. It is from that background where the symposium seek to use and focus on the multidisciplinary approach in trying to make our cities to be inclusive. The symposium has planned to accommodate researchers, academics, students, government officials, and of course, industry experts. So in the next few days, you will listen to over 45 presentations in 6 rooms under 6 themes. I'm also delighted to note that we have received registration just below 500, of which some of them they've indicated there will be more available for the rooms. On behalf of organizing committee, I would like to thank all our room chairs that we have who have dedicated their time, our repertoires, presenters, keynote speakers, and of course, all our delegates who makes this possible. On behalf of Sachi Chair for Inclusive Cities team, I would also like to thank all our partners for coming up and showing up when we needed them most in organizing this event. As organizing team, we're confident this symposium is well organized, focused, and indeed, we are confident that there's a lot to learn from this. But we will let you be the judge. We do hope that you will enjoy the program, but also enjoy not only the program, but make new friends. I thank you. Over to you, Professor Adebayo.
Thank you, Professor Shipungu. Can I take this opportunity now to call Professor Ernst Nene Kalema to give a longer welcome remarks into this symposium.
Thank you, Prof. Adebayo. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for the organizers of this symposium. This will be an exciting symposium. I had a look at the program very, very deeply, and I'm just quite excited. And I'm sure most of you are excited. So we welcome you all our local, national, and international guests to this very, very important symposium. I don't want to take the fire out of what will be presented today and throughout the 3 days, but I just want to say that as Professor Magadimisha Shipungu has mentioned, the issue of inclusivity is something that it's a challenge to all of us, and we all have to find ways in which we can address it in our own spaces, wherever we are in our spheres of influence. So I want to emphasize that part of what this symposium is all about is also about finding solutions to a number of challenges that the world is facing, in particular because of the challenge of the corona pandemic, but also other challenges that because of corona pandemic have been also silenced, that they don't, no longer part of the discussion. But I hope that this symposium, and by looking at the program, I think that these issues will be addressed. What I wanted also to draw your attention to is that part of inclusivity is also about equity. And if I'm a sociologist, so I was quite glad that Professor Magademisha emphasized the idea of the interdisciplinary nature of the symposium. So as a sociologist, we like definitions, and some of you probably know a lot about us. We will want to go into definitions and what the meaning of issues are. But equity is defined as a fair and respectful treatment of all people, and I'm emphasizing here. And it involves creation of opportunities, reduction of disparities in opportunities and outcomes for diverse communities. When you think of equity, it also acknowledges that these disparities are rooted in historical and contemporary injustices and disadvantages. So when we think about inclusion then, and I'm using Humphrey's definition, it acknowledges the absence of lack of the universal definition of what inclusion is. But key to Humphrey's definition of inclusion is the promotion of visibility of people and the recognition that those who are normally excluded are included, and the acceptance of diversity and rights of those who are different from us. Another aspect in that definition of inclusion is participation and involvement of persons with differentiated needs. So the idea here is that whatever we do, we need to look at the specificity of needs that people have. And this symposium will address those in depth. But also at the end, in that definition, there's the idea of achievement. So what can we do to promote progress for better socio-ecological, socio-economic, and within the spatial space interactions for inclusive settings? So when we think about diversity and inclusivity and equity, we also have to note that what we know in the research is that inclusivity promotes collaboration, and the research tells us a lot about that. Inclusivity promotes better relationships between groups. Inclusivity promotes stakeholder engagement, and I think this symposium will be a testimony to that as we all come together. Inclusivity, it's about social change. It's about change that will impact all of us in a positive way. And what we need to strive for, and I think these are the themes that will emerge from this symposium, is how can we improve collaborative efforts to make sure that our cities and our dwellings are inclusive for all who live in them. That resources must be evenly distributed, that we are promoting healthy environments that that promotes demarginalization and that deals with marginalization and fragmentation. So I hope that we all will learn. I am excited, and I'm hoping that you are excited. So on behalf of the School of Built Environment and Development Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nana Poku, on behalf of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, and the entire management committee of the college and the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, and all the partners that are here with us. I would like to welcome you all to this event. And for those of you who are in Durban, it's a beautiful sunny day in Durban. It's winter, but we get to enjoy a beautiful sunny day in Durban. However, I'm sure in other parts of the world, you are enjoying a beautiful sunny day. The sun will always be there. And hopefully this symposium will shed that light for us to move ahead and make this world a better place. So on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the organizers, on behalf of the SACHI Chair of Inclusive Cities, and all the communities that have put their hand into this symposium, I welcome you humbly. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and welcome to this virtual space of learning. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kalema. I think we have to move on to the next person. And please, I would like to keep the time so that we're able to cover everything within the framework of time that was given to us. Now, the next person is Dr. Subrarati Musami. She is the former head of Development Planning, Environmental and Management Unit of eThekwini Municipality, Durban, South Africa. And she's the holder of a PhD in planning. And she's now presently the manager for the program manager for urban renewal and capacity development, policy and institutional support, which is key to this nature of our symposium today. On that note, we call Dr. Musami to present herself.
Good morning, Chair, Professor Adebayo. Thank you to the SACHI Chair, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, all protocols observed. I thank you for this opportunity. And I just want to figure out how to share this, but just give me a minute if that's possible. So greetings and a warm morning greeting to everybody. Because of time, I'm just going to try and be as quick as possible. And I just want to take this time to thank everybody for inviting me today at this important event, and for my city allowing me to do the reaction component to this. Just to say that a lot of what I share is my own perspectives, but from being both inside the city and not necessarily that of the city, but I share it as a way to provoke and to set the scene for the next 3 days, so to speak. I won't go through presentation outlines because of time, but needless to say that there is a presentation outline, and I will share this, and this will be received by or through the organizers for the various participants. I start off by really just taking a look at where we are. And what comes to me is, in understanding inclusivity, it's really something that we have to grapple with our professions as practitioners and institutions of professions, be they planning, be they architecture, be they environmental institutions, be it cities and governments, universities, etc. And the starting point to do this is really to be that reflective practitioner, that reflective profession and institutions. And I raise a couple of questions about, if we're going to have to move into inclusivity and deal with injustices, etc., and make it better, then we have to start somewhere and take critical looks at what we're doing on a daily basis, what we're teaching, how we're governing, etc. And I ask questions about how open and safe this reflexivity is, how honest it is, how do we get to do it, how exciting and fearful it can be, and where's the help and the support in doing this, and the multiplicity of stakeholders to assist. And then I come into this notion that the built environment profession, as much as we always try to think and navel gaze and be critical, it's necessary, but we really have to break away from what we have done and how we've done it in the past. And the notion of it being obviously overtly positive and it always means well presents itself as a limitation to how we think and question ourselves and what we do as various institutions, professions, and practitioners in the notion of achieving an inclusive city. Coming down to South Africa and Africa, we've also come from a post-apartheid context, colonization, independence context. And with this comes this notion of that we are democratic. We are democratic professions, practitioners, institutions. And what comes this is the notion that we do nothing wrong. We're doing the best we can. Where we're learning from, how we're learning from, these leave, this is often left untouched. And I raise this question as an important challenge about how do we see things differently to be those kind of professions, practitioners, and institutions. Coming to just a very brief understanding of the inclusive city and the just city, I appreciate that it comes from three conflicting and overlapping concepts, and there'll be different theorists and ways of seeing and understanding and engaging with an inclusive and just city. But I'm talking as a practitioner, as well as somebody that likes to read around theory, etc. It's around equity, processes, democracy, and diversity, and previous speakers have spoke to this in this regard. I use the notion of Lefebvre, who speaks about social construction, that people have the right and should have the right to access the city. And people change and cities change, and we should continually understand those rights, which is so important in African cities. Harvey, that does the notion and creates the seed of urbanism, space, and social justice at a city level that cannot be separated from each other. But in doing so, let us appreciate the social relationships, who's involved, who's not involved, how resources and alliances work and how don't they work, and how this creates winners, losers, and mediated spaces in our cities. This then brings me to the notion of, as local governments, how limited we are, as agency, how limited we are. Yes, we are limited in the context of capitalism and neoliberalism and bigger structures. But I also take a deeper look and say, we have a progressive constitution, we have developmental local government as approach, we have enabling legislation. And in South Africa, we have the benefit of having a city planning, city governance, city mandates as something as not that is tested. It's not that we question in decentralization and devolution. There's some aspects of that, but to a large extent, we've evolved in that context. And it's at a city level that we can make places and people's lives better or worse, from safe cities to access to public health, to access to trading permits, to recognition of informality, etc. And therefore, the city should not be dismissed in this context of how we achieve the inclusive city and the professions and the institutions. We're certainly not a city devoid of frameworks that enable us to embrace diversity, to embrace inclusivity. And just from reading the IDP, you'll see we are signatories to a range of treaties, public declarations, etc. However, given that we're on an international platform, we're also a city that has a housing backlog that would take us some 90 years, and access to basic services, water, sanitation, electricity, refuse removal, that could be anything from 27 to 153 years, just to give you a context of that. In understanding how public our cities are, I give you a little inside navigation about my city. Generally, our municipality is regarded as conservative, risk and partnership adverse. As bureaucrats, we often come with elitist ideas, and even if we don't, we aspire to it, and fast-traveling policies, always help us to aspire to such notions. We are only focused on certain traditional relationships, the likes of big business, big developers, big corporates, economic councils, crowd coalitions. We nurture these, and these have direct access to mayors and resources and executives. But then it does beg the question, who nurtures relationships of the marginalized? And when it's nurtured, the resources, the critical thinking, the policy making is in dire need. As we shift into a more constrained municipality, our resources for inclusivity outside mandates will become more constrained. And as we move into cities that think about projects about it needing to be bankable, financial, and speculative, these will becoming more declined in the current context. In the past 25 years, I can say that the built environment has really evolved. There was a time that environmental planning, urban design, housing did not feature in local government. It was on the periphery, and that time has changed for various reasons. I am also mindful with the COVID pandemic. We've seen and we've witnessed the differences in our institutions and how we respond. Our environmental health is at an all-time low. Our public health services are at a low. These are areas that we need to change and shift, and I can only hope in time and what we're learning, we will rethink our institutions and our resources. I then just very briefly take you through some provocations that I enjoy and I would like to share as we move into the next 3 days. I think Yeftichil really presents something that we can grapple with about gray spaces. It talks about urbanism that's in the South. It talks about the dilemmas we face as practitioners and professions about how to recognize urbanism in the South, the gray spaces, the transformation spaces, and how we can change things. And by doing so, become more inclusive and give recognition. I myself, I raise issues around some of the notions of multidisciplinary teams. And then I call for how we can move forward in SDFs and in planning. When we think of new spaces, new development spaces, how do we zone in and indicate and identify for low-income housing and public and social housing and services? How land use, environmental and traffic planners can look at scheme amendments that support homelessness and definitions and use multiplicity of land uses and uses at night, parking lots, leftover verges, etc. How urban designers and traffic planners can call for road diets to support productive streets, from street closures to street markets, from pedestrian safety and respite. Feinstein herself gives an examples of equity, diversity, and democracy. And on the democracy, I just leave a provocative question. To what extent has Pluma allowed us to make planning more democratic and more reachable? Some concluding comments. I would say where eThekwini is on this notion of inclusivity, I would say it's relative and it's variable. I would say as far as a municipality goes, we are far from being an open governance system. As both professions, practitioners, I can see many opportunities in how we can engage around inclusivity. As professional institutions, universities, researchers, and theorists, there is a responsibility and opportunity to make a change for the built environment profession and practice. Conflict and mobilization will be necessary and inevitable. But lastly, I say technology, planetary limits, COVID-19, and the renewal of movements of stewardship and citizenry has certainly shifted what is normal, and making the inclusive city is an exciting reality. I thank you for that, Chair, and organizers and participants, and I wish you well in the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanu. I think because of the time, we have to move to the next section. If we do want to ask questions, please don't forget to use the chat to write your question, that we can take all of them together at the end, and we can post it to the audience. So the next person that I will call upon now is Mr. Sitole Mbanga, who is going to talk on the reaction on inclusive cities in Southern Africa. We've been doing so well with time. Please remember, you also have 10 minutes like the rest. Mr. Sitole Mbanga is the CEO of South African City Network. And also, he has previously worked as a local government coordinator in national business initiatives, and also working on integrated development, IDP, the integrated development planning. So based on that short introduction, can Mr. Sitole Mbanga make your presentation, please?
Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, I can hear you. Maybe come closer and so that you can speak louder.
I just have, I've been trying to move venues because of connectivity issues.
No, it's clear now. It's clear now. Very good. Thank you.
It's clear now. Okay, I think you can see me. I'm just gonna switch off my video though.
Up to you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well and see you very clearly.
Okay. Thanks very much, Prof. I was saying I'm going to switch off my video just to make sure that my connection is stable, if that's fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and it's stable. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so good morning to you, Prof, and good morning to all the colleagues that are in the symposium. Just apologies for checking in late because of the connectivity issues that I had. I've had to change venues. Firstly, I would just like to thank the organizers of the symposium for having considered getting the Cities Network to speak, so that we are not just a partner, but we can voice out our own views around the topic at hand. Unfortunately, because I was not here early enough, I didn't get to hear what Subs Monsami was saying, Prof, and the speaker before her. So I'm going to speak very generically about how in the South African context, and I think in particular, how from a South African Cities Network point of view, the issue of inclusivity and its importance. Just briefly about the South African Cities Network. We were established way back in the year 2002 as an organization which was meant to conduct research, what we call knowledge generation, through the eyes of 9 of South Africa's largest municipalities. In South Africa, there's plus minus 280 municipalities, and they differ according to size, size of population, importance to the economy, as well as their role in society. The South African Cities Network then works with 9 of the largest. These are metropolitan municipalities from Johannesburg, eThekwini, which is otherwise known as Durban from a global perspective, Cape Town, Nelson Mandela, and many others that make up that particular 9. Over the last period of our existence as the South African Cities Network, we had managed to frame our program of work along 5 themes. There's a theme that's looking at the economy, which we call the productive city. There's a theme that's looking at the green agenda, which we called the sustainable program, the Sustainable Cities program. And it's not just only about ecology, it's also about the institutional sustainability issues of the municipalities that we worked with. And then there is the good governance measures that each institution ought to be responsive to and also enhance so as to be able to be more accountable. And then the fourth is the long-term city development strategy, which is the long-term city development strategy aspects or program that looks at assisting municipalities think beyond the short term that we have into a long term. And then the last one, which is the fifth one, is the inclusive city. Now, the inclusive cities program is very important, particularly if you think of the South African environment. We come from a background which otherwise was divided according to race, the apartheid phenomena, divided according to levels of wealth, the economy. And I think you would have heard that South Africa is very much divided according to rich and poor. And that also projects itself through race. Most Black people quite poor. And as a result of apartheid, one of the things that apartheid had successfully managed to do was to drive a wedge across racial lines and create areas where others lived in separate spaces, thus driving the lack of inclusivity. To date, that lack of inclusivity has crossed the racial lines, really. You see lack of inclusivity of very economically poor people, lack of inclusivity from a gender-based perspective, lack of inclusivity from a point of view of the young versus the much more matured. And it continues to play itself out there. So the Cities Network's Inclusive Cities program has on the main been focused on trying to make sure that we rearrest from a long history of no less than 300 years, the agenda that sought to divide people along racial lines and make them much more exclusive, so to speak, so that the city at some point was the exclusive preserve of certain groups of people within South Africa. So this symposium for me then comes in quite handy because one of the struggles that I think we are all facing as a country as well as a continent is how do we achieve inclusivity? Our program in the South African Cities Network of Inclusivity has sought to utilize the tools that have been presented to us, i.e. the planning tool, for instance, that is the integrated development planning tool, which for a number of years now, as the South African Cities Network, we have sort of bemoaned its lack of sufficiency or efficiency, in the sense that the IDP, in as much as it is a very good and a very important tool that allows our municipalities to become more inclusive, it has unfortunately fallen into the trap of getting our practitioners elected and appointed officials in the various municipalities. It has led to them becoming very siloed in the implementation and therefore unintendedly driving the lack of inclusivity in our cities. And I think colleagues such as Subs that are practitioners in the cities and that have been in the planning fraternity for quite a long time would have very practicable examples where, for instance, there is a plan that has been put in place and yet that particular plan is not linked to the budget. So there's a disjuncture between what is being, on the other hand, what the Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so
We can hear you.
okay, you had lost audio for a bit. So I don't know at what stage you had lost audio, but I've been speaking for some time now. I don't know at what stage did you lose me. So I was saying that, unfortunately, I think the apartheid inheritance, and I know that we've been speaking about the apartheid spatial planning inheritance for a relatively long time now, maybe 20, 25 years since the dawn of democracy. But it's something that we cannot escape. It is something that is there, that continues to challenge how, from a policy perspective and from a policy implementation perspective, our cities would generally struggle to get us to be inclusive. Earlier on, I was making an example that in as much as we have an important instrument in the form of the integrated development planning, or the IDP rather, the integrated development plan instrument, which is an instrument that the state has bequeathed on municipalities to enable them to plan, there's still a lot of contradictions in the system that get us to make, that get municipalities to struggle to get to a point where we can speak about inclusivity in a very meaningful way. This is, for instance, you will get a plan that is under budgeted for. So the budget itself doesn't speak with any level of adequacy to the plan of that particular municipalities. In other instances, you get a disjuncture between national government departments, particularly sector departments that are important levers to drive equitability and therefore the agenda of inclusivity in the city, being unable to be aligned to what municipalities are doing. Most recently, government has institutionalized, and in fact is also in the process of institutionalizing, another tool or another instrument called the district development model, where the intention is to make sure that nationally based government departments, particularly the sector departments, channel their effort towards ensuring inclusivity through an instrument, so that they are speaking to a single plan in the municipality. It's now called a one plan that the district development model is espousing. So that through that particular one plan, we are able to channel the resources quite appropriately. At this point in time, I cannot say that we have proof of the concept, but I think there is a will to get national government departments in particular to speak as in one when it comes to providing assistance to municipalities. I think the third point that I would like to make is to say it is quite important that when we drive these agendas, including the inclusive cities agenda, it's quite important for us not to forget that there are other influential players in the space, i.e. the colleagues that are in this room, people that are in the, people that are in the innovation space. It's quite important that they are not left behind. The private sector or the business sector is also a very important sector that plays a meaningful role in terms of how we can achieve inclusivity. I think in our case in South Africa, for that matter, the private sector plays a critical role in determining what happens in space, because they put up or they establish townships, and where we through policy or not, where we allow them to put up those townships in unstrategic spatial areas, I think that will be quite problematic. So it's quite important that we have a good and a productive working relationship across the sectors, i.e. government, the private sector, your civil society organizations that also play a very important role, as well as people that are in the innovation space that you find in institutions, in tertiary education institutions, and are in the innovation space. So with those few words, I think it's important that I stop and I'll allow the chairperson, yourself, Prof, to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banga. I think we are trying to catch up with the time. We are really on time, but we keep all our questions towards the end. And I think everybody should use the chat to send their question through, or you can at a later stage, you raise up your hand if you don't feel like writing. So on that note now, I think I have to move now to the introduction of the keynote speaker, our international guest from Professor Piotr Lorenz is an architect and urban planner, also a professor and head of departments of urban design and regional planning at the Faculty of Architecture, Gdańsk University of Technology in Poland. But when you go through his CV, you will know that he's relevant to what we are doing now. He has an expert in development projects, including through government appointment and research in various areas and urban transformation processes, shaping urban public spaces. And when you look further, he's also part of International Society ISOCAP, and also Polish town planner in Poland as a registered practitioner and chairman of the board of society. When you look at that, you know that he has assumed a various position, both in academia, in the practice, and also an international organization. So on that note, I would like Professor Piotr to come forward and make his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues. I hope you can hear me and see me. And also, I'm going to share my presentation right now in the full screen mode, just to reconfirm that everything is visible and the transmission is okay. Is everything okay?
Yes, it's visible. We can read it clearly.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Professor Ambrose. Thank you very much, Professor Hangwelani. It's a real pleasure to be in South Africa again. As you may know, I love the country and I've been many times to UKZN and not only to UKZN. Although this time virtually, unfortunately, I very much regret that I cannot travel this time. But, you know, due to the virus situation, it's really impossible to travel intercontinentally right now. But I sincerely hope that we will be able to meet again in person in a very close future. The topic of my today's speech is the need of social phase of not only social housing, and I would like to focus a little bit on the post-pandemic challenges. So we are basically discussing these pandemic and post-pandemic realities. And I'm gonna bring maybe slightly different perspective to that, what is so to speak visible, or which is experienced by the community of Durban, eThekwini, or larger community of South Africa, or Africa in general, I would say. But I would like to bring maybe a little bit of the beginning of thinking about it, what the social housing is about, and also to what extent this can be treated as a kind of inclusive paradigm for the inclusive cities, also for the future. As the point is that actually we are, is it like everything we are discussing right now has already been discussed and experienced to some extent before, although we are adding, so to speak, a little bit different flavor or a little bit different issues associated with the contemporary challenges. So I'm going to speak a little bit about those post-pandemic challenges also. And this is, I think, a kind of important part of the whole game, because we have to get ready for that, how our planning and how our cities and how our social housing is going to look like in the post-pandemic realities. So first of all, we have to understand that where the social housing has actually came from. And we have to understand that at the very beginning, we had industrial estates or big farms or any other kind of industrialized modes of production, which were accompanied by the housing estates, which were developed by the owner of those big estates. And of course, there were very different backgrounds regarding that, but basically this was the beginning of the story. And within the planning theory, we have the whole set of the different concepts associated with that, which I'm more than sure that every planning student is and every planning professional is aware of. It's like industrial estates, neighborhood units, affordable and accessible housing, and all this kind of the things. I think all of those concepts and things are being delivered globally. Doesn't matter what kind of school or what kind of continent or what kind of culture the particular person is coming from. But what is very important is that within that we have those specific concepts that are associated with the social housing. And I would like to discuss a little bit the evolution of those, which, as I said, is a kind of blueprint for that what we are dealing with right now. Of course, the physical manifestation of that is different in South Africa than in US or Europe, but still like a concept and the issues which we are discussing about are basically the same, despite from all those differences. So we actually start from those industrial related estates. As you can see here, the very famous industrial estate Port Sunlight in UK, which is a kind of the blueprint or the first ever estate like that developed in relation to the developed parallelly industrial estate. And basically the concept here was that the owner of the factory was developing the housing estate for the people who are working in this factory. And this concept was elaborated further on in many different countries, in many different continents, and in many different variants. Although basically this was the beginning, this was the origin, and the idea was to provide more or less decent, as for those times, decent living conditions for the people who are actually working in this particular place. And today we may understand this model as a little bit inappropriate for a number of the different reasons, but I think we have to understand the basics where it was coming from. From that point of departure, we have arrived to another level, and this another level was the, so to speak, independent, so to speak, social estates, which were developed in Europe at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Also, they were embedded very much in the garden cities movement. So there were a lot of the different interrelations between the different planning theories. And on that basis, the neighborhood unit concept and the concept associated with the creation of so to speak, complete social infrastructure complexes in parallel to the large-scale housing estates was actually developed. And this actually was coming from the regional plan for the state of the New York. And in US, here is the concept of this, so to speak, neighborhood unit with the community center, with the public transit, and with also those very famous first examples which were implemented in case of Radburn in New Jersey, which again was a kind of blueprint, was a kind of template for the contemporary housing estates. Although, as I mentioned at the beginning, these were coming from the social housing concepts. And it's good to know that actually all of those things are still in place. And if you ever have a chance to travel to US, I think it's quite worth seeing these places, how they are still today. But I would like to bring your attention to a slightly different model, which was the case of the kind of semi-independent social units, which were developed in the interwar time in between 1920s and 30s, so more than 100 years ago. This is the example from Vienna in Austria, where the municipality of Vienna was developing a kind of semi-independent housing units completed with all the necessary social infrastructure, providing a kind of blueprint for something which we are right now discussing, like the 15-minute cities or the compact cities or the independent units. Whatever is the name and whatever is the contemporary tradition, we have to understand these things have been invented already around 100 years ago. So this is nothing new, I would say. The only thing which is new these days is the new context for developing or redeveloping these kinds of structures. But I think it's important to stress that the blueprints are there. And of course, we are right now discussing slightly different model for that. But it is important to know that these models actually have been already conceptualized and tried and tested for more than 100 years. So what is interesting about this? This place is called Karl Marxhof. It's one of the most famous ones of those compounds throughout the globe. And not only because of its unique architecture, but also because of the fact that you could live there your entire life, because there were places for jobs. There was all the social infrastructure was provided over there, including the healthcare facilities, including the daily needs or the services which were catering for the daily needs of the citizens. There were kindergarten, schools, and so on. Everything was there, so you could literally live there. You did not need to leave this place for your entire life, and you could spend your entire life within this kind of little structure. And this concept was elaborated further on by the large industrialists. And here is another very interesting case from Thomas Bata, a famous Czech industrialist who was developing the entire city of Zlín for the purpose of the large-scale industrial development of his shoe factory. As you may know, Bata is the famous name for the shoe factory, and he actually delivered this in the case of this Czech city, which later on has been understood as it's a kind of the blueprint of the self-sufficient, so to speak, social city for this kind of infrastructure. But also, this took form for the entire cities. And here we can see this is the example of the planning for the city of Gdansk from the interwar time. This is the city where I'm coming from, and this is the example of planning for the low-rise garden city type of development in relation to these social structures. So everything which is black on these structures were existing structures, and everything which is gray, these were the new housing structures which were planned during the interwar time. So just to give you an example that it's nothing new, and that actually we are dealing with this. So let's jump to the modern times from that. And let's understand what are the needs and what are the issues associated with that. First of all, we have to understand that there is a growing need for affordable and accessible housing. And this need doesn't know any limits of continents, cultures, and countries. We have exactly the same problems in South Africa, which I know from my personal experience, thanks to Professor Magdemisha, I know it quite well. And but also the same problems are in Europe, the same problems are in Asia, the same problems are in North America. Basically, there is a growing need for affordable and accessible housing, which is in conflict with the liberal economic approach, which we can see on in our daily situation. This actually poses a lot of the issues for the urban development policies, because those issues are associated not only with the need for housing, but also with the gentrification, but also with social exclusion, but also with social injustice, and a lot of the different issues which are emerging from this neoliberal approach, and not catering for this need for affordable and accessible housing. Of course, all of that has a lot of consequences for real estate and land markets. And this is very important to understand that this is not only the social issue, it is not only the political issue, but this is also, if not before the most, it is also the real estate and economic relation, real estate related and economy related issue. And we have to understand that this is a very comprehensive and complex phenomenon, and it cannot be solved just with the social action, but it has also to be dealt with from the economy and land market point of view. But also, what is important, it has both very severe, so to speak, consequences for social stratification of the city. And actually, if we adopt this kind of liberal approach, we are actually, in some cases, and we can observe it in a lot of the different countries, we can observe actually this pushing the social components away from the city core. And basically, we are facing the ongoing ghettoization processes, which are basically a clear path to all the possible problems which we might imagine from the social point of view for our future cities and for our future urban policies. And of course, there are different answers to these issues. And the answers are associated with planning for the comprehensively conceptualized new urban quarters. Here is the example of the Kirchsteigfeld from Potsdam, from Germany. But basically, these issues are not really dealt with in all the cases. I can tell you that only in some of the countries of the world, this issue is being understood as the key issue for the urban policy. In many other countries, including Poland, actually, my home country, we still do not recognize this as the serious issue. We basically still believe in the liberal market policies, and it's a kind of clear path to more problems than we are having even now. So this is a lot of the issues which we have to understand about that. Although what I would like to say is that the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as all the other consequences of these phenomena, are actually making this picture even more complicated. And this is the second part of my today's intervention, as we are not only discussing the issues associated with the need for the social and affordable and accessible housing, but we also have to understand that some of the features of the social housing are being recognized as required and as perceived as really necessary for the people who have been stuck in the lockdown procedures in their homes. I think we all we have all been there. We have all been locked down in March or April last year, and we all started to understand what kind of social consequences it brings, and also what kind of consequences for the real life the whole thing brought to us. So basically, the first thing is that we started to understand that within the lockdown procedures, we were not only stuck to our homes, but we were also stuck to our own communities. And some of these communities are really alien to some of us, you know. We suddenly realize we do not know our neighbors, we do not know who is living right next door, and we suddenly realize that the people on whom we are relying on usually, but living a little bit far away from in the city, or even our families or so, I mean, they are not accessible anymore. You cannot commute there, you cannot get there, you cannot ask your mother, brother, or friend for help because they are living far away from you and they cannot travel, they cannot get to you, okay? So in case you are in need. So we started to realize that we actually started to rediscover that there is something like community which is organized on the territorial basis. So the community which is associated with our home district, with our home street, with our home apartment block, whatever you are living in, and basically that you have to rely on this community and you have to rediscover this community. I think it is a very big lesson which has not yet been outspoken and dealt with after the lockdown procedures. A second thing which was very important in that is that when we were not allowed to go for any recreational areas, in example, we started to realize that we do need recreational areas and greenery which are available within the walking distance, and even potentially within the close vicinity of our homes. So we started to rediscover the values of the local greenery and the other recreational facilities, especially outdoor recreational facilities, as well as local businesses, which is also very important, and another part of the whole game. We started to realize that we do not travel to any supermarket or any other large-scale shopping gallery or whatever we are going to, but actually we have to rely on our local shopkeeper, whom we have been ignoring for our entire life in many cases. So this is a kind of very important part of the whole game. And of course, there are some other challenges associated with job cuts, business closings. In example, the entire gastronomy sector has been entirely closed, at least in Poland. I guess it was the same in case of South Africa and so on, because of all the issues and so on. So basically, we started to realize that there is a lot to change in our housing pattern. And we have to come back to the roots, basically, regarding these social housing templates, I would say, as these examples, which I started from, I mean, the sport sunlight and the garden housing movement and so on. I mean, these estates actually had all these features which we are looking for right now. So this is a kind of very interesting situation that we are rediscovering more than 120 years after these concepts have been conceptualized, the values of those structures, and of course not of the structures which have been developed, but of the entire concepts which have to be reapplied to our contemporary urban policies and our contemporary urban planning practices, because basically they are the good answer to all these problems which we have been facing during the lockdown procedures. And these are the excellent examples how to deal with all these issues and problems. So what are the different situations now regarding that? First of all, we have to understand that there are basically two types of the situations. First of all, that we have those traditional social housing complexes, which are for the people in need of affordable accommodation. And this is something which is a subject for the urban policy for more than 120 years ago. For more than 120 years. So basically, this issue is still valid. And because of those business cuts and job cuts and all these kind of things, it is still valid, and it is still more than important for our communities, for our municipalities. But at the same time, we have to understand we have the brand new challenges and the brand new solutions, which have to be planned for the people within the lockdown realities or after the lockdown realities. And we have to understand that the entire pandemic and the entire issues and problems which we had to deal with, that all those things actually have to be dealt with in a new way, because we have to understand that the recreational facilities, that the social infrastructure, it all matters. It all has to be within our reach, that the local businesses matter. And we just did not believe in this mantra for the last 20 or 30 years during the liberal times. So we are looking for some new types of the social solutions. And let's look very briefly at both situations, at both cases. I hope we're going to finish on time, so don't worry, I'm not going to go very much over time. I hope so, at least. If time is running out, please let me know, but I do hope I will finish in a few minutes. So first of all, for those traditional social housing, we have to understand that there is a growing amount of people facing difficulties associated with changes in the economic situation, also coming from this turbo-liberal economy, which we are still facing, and the COVID-related changes are also contributing to the fact that the amount of the people who are in need of the decent social housing is actually growing. So this is not something which is vanishing, it is actually growing, and these issues have to be dealt with in this or that way. Secondly, there is an appreciation of the comprehensive approach for the social infrastructure. This includes local shops, community facilities. Again, this lesson which we have been learning more than 100 years ago is still in place, or it has to be a kind of rediscovered for the contemporary traditional social housing. We have to understand that all these things matter. Actually, I think that Africa is in a better situation than Europe in this case, because basically all these social ties are still there to some extent, at least in some of the traditional communities. In Europe, we lost it already. So we have to rediscover it. And in Africa, you have to make sure that you do not lose it, basically speaking, right? That all these things matter more than we could potentially actually expect. And of course, in these cases, or in the cases that actually are that the social features of the social housing are lost, Then we have to reintroduce the local community-oriented spatial solutions, including, in example, not only the social infrastructure, but also, in example, facilities for remote working. We all remember from the lockdown times that actually we had to kick our children out from home because basically we had to work online. Okay, we had to run the meetings, deliver lectures, and so on. And you could not do that, you know, if your children are sitting on your knees, basically speaking, right? Or at least it is hard to do that. So you need some space to work. And in case you cannot provide, you cannot have it at home, you need to have a kind of special facilities for that, which means facilities for the remote working. And this is another addition which we have to conceptualize and do. But also there are the new solutions for the lockdown realities. And these new solutions are associated with understanding that local businesses matter. And also we have to provide a spatial framework for that. So we have to understand that within the any kind of facility, we cannot rely on car traffic and commuting to the, in example, local grocery store, but it is much better to have the local grocery store within the walking distance. So we have to rediscover the multifunctionality of those small scale structures, and we have to plan for it. We have to change our planning paradigm. We have to change the way we design these structures. We have to change the way we actually are living there. And I still remember when I was in Durban last time, which was around 2 years ago, Professor Magidi Misha knows that, you know, I've been living in a place on the waterfront, and honestly speaking, I had to drive to buy a bottle of water. You know, it's something which is something we cannot live with anymore, honestly speaking. You know, we have to deal with that. We have to understand this is an issue. And if you are living in some parts of the city, you have to basically enjoy those goodies of the walking distances, especially to all these basic social infrastructures which we are actually in need. So secondly, it's also associated with rediscovering the values associated with the social interactions. And this is a little bit more fragile or soft kind of the whole thing. As I mentioned, you know, during the lockdown times, we had to understand that we were not able to rely on our families, in example, because they had to drive to meet us, and this was forbidden to drive. It was forbidden to commute. So you had to rediscover the social interactions with your neighbors, friends who are living right next door. And actually some of those people were in need, not only because that they were impacted by the COVID-related diseases, but also because of the fact that basically they just needed some help with their daily needs, with walking their dogs, with taking care of their kids, and all these kind of the things which are important. And finally, there is the need for out from home office solutions, you know, and we have to understand that the home office is going to stay with us, and the remote working is going to stay with us probably forever. It will not be maybe to that scale as it was enjoyed during the, or not enjoyed during the lockdown periods. But basically, these actually are still, that these challenges actually are have to be taken into account. What are the consequences for the physical changes in cities? You know, I'm an urban designer and architect, so I'm always looking not at the policy solutions, but at the real physical solutions in the city. What the whole thing brings to the physical space of the city. So I would point out 4 elements in that case. First of all, that we have to plan for the new types of urban structures. Those 15-minute cities is something which is we have to enjoy, we have to plan for, we have to design for, and we have to build. Okay, and if we already have the built-up structures, we have to restructure them. Okay, it's very, very important thing. We have to get ready we have to be resilient for any further challenges, maybe not coming from COVID-19, but from any other disasters which may happen in a closer or further future. Secondly, we have to understand we need the new types of the office space, we need the new types of working environment associated with co-working and boutique type offices. We need some new spaces for social interactions and community development, which is also extremely important. And finally, we have some new spaces for local businesses, especially for street side shopping, commercial services, and so on. But of course, this also brings challenges for urban policies, which are associated with rediscovering the social phase of housing as a place to live, work, and interact, and not only to stay overnight. Okay, so this is a very important thing, that our housing environment is our social environment, right now. And this is something we have in many cases forgotten. Secondly, we have to accelerate the introduction of those 15-minute cities, the compact multi-use urban structures. Again, the keyword here is the multi-use urban structures. And finally, we have to rethink the roles and shapes of urban transportation. This is going to be a huge challenge for the future. And this is basically how it's going to look like. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I went a little bit over time, but I hope we are okay.
Okay,
I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much.
So we started late. Thank you very much. And I think we've come to the end of the presentation in this section. So there are a couple of questions that might be reaching. I think Kara Rampal, we kindly read all the questions for us. We can take them individually. And if there are some of them that are similar, we will take them collectively and answer into those things. And there may be some explanation and concept that might come out of the presentation that we can also highlight in the discussion. So can I call upon Kara Rampal to present the question for us? She's from Town and Regional Planning. She's still our student trying to complete his master's degree, and this will be very useful for you. And she also works with the chair of Inclusive City. And on that note, please, can I call you to present the questions?
Thank you, Professor Adebayo. So the first question, I think, is directed to Mr. Sithole of Cities Network. And the question is from Mr. Edmore. He asks, since the launch of the DDM, what would you say are the achievements so far or the improvements in comparison to the previous policies alike?
So, Mr. Sithole, is he? Mr. Sithole, is he left?
I think he's left. I'm looking. Okay, he's left. Let's just move on to the next.
So, well, can you repeat the question once again?
Okay, the question was, since the launch of the DDM, what would you say are the achievements so far or the improvements in comparison to the previous policies alike?
So that is an issue of comparative policy and highlight what are the positive and negative aspect of those policies. And is there anybody who would like to answer that? Since Mr. Sithole is not around, please we advise all.
Try.
Pardon? Hello. Yeah.
So I can try.
Okay.
I think the DDM is still fairly new. What it has indicated is that as governments across, we have spheres of government, so national, provincial, local, and we all equal spheres and nominated in terms of the Municipal Systems Act and the Constitution. Notwithstanding, a lot of impact on life, on space.
Sorry, for the benefit of the participant, you know, when we use abbreviation, it can be misinterpreted. Can you tell us what is DDM? It's about, we know it, but many other people across the world may not know.
Okay, sure, Prof. DDM stands for the District Development Model, and it's run through the presidency. And it's really about trying to get whole government coming together for the whole of society. So in many aspects, even though we have spheres of government that deal with different mandates like environmental planning or town and regional planning, etc., there is a reliance on other spheres of government to support the outcomes at a local level, regional level, and provincial and national level. And DDM tries to connect that. As the question was regarding the achievements have been limited to date, mainly because the process is in its early stages. But what has come through is a joining up of common agendas. So as an example, if we're talking about the port in Durban, it's not something just between our port authority and the city, but it also brings into play our provincial Department of Transport, as well as our national department, as well as economic development sectors in different spheres of government. How do they come together to support an efficient and effective port? So those are some of the achievements. And in the Durban case, we're one of the pilots around the district development model. And one of the key achievements to date has been a more greater focus on port efficiencies, in particular the Durban port, given its prominence within the national location as well as economic realm for the country. If I may conclude there, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. But the question I would like to ask is, what is the difference between this and intergovernment relationship and integration in development? From an urban design point of view, when we plan city, we want the people from housing to take part of their schools, hospital, and all those things, so that every government sphere is able to contribute into that development. Is it a similar scenario? Because that was there in the early 96, 97, 98 in South Africa. I don't know what is the difference between that and this?
Prof, the main distinction is that there needs to be a common identity or agenda setting across the spheres of government. So around a case of like education and housing, let's just say we take an example of a huge development north of the city, which is called Canubia. We have housing taking place, but no social facilities and educational facilities. So it compels government to have a joint plan in space at a local level. And whilst local government is a key driver into it, it has to think about what it can do and can't do as in partnership. So it's coming together of budgets, coming together of projects, coming together of policies, and coming together in space. I'm not so familiar about the early 70s and where the comparatives are and where they differ, but that's the notion of the district development model. It still is in its early stages, and we still have mandates as different spheres of government, and how that will play out in actually making the district development model implementationable is still something to be seen. So we still, like I said, it's early stages, and we're still grappling with this on how to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get in? How many questions do you have? So that.
Sorry, there's 6 more questions, and they're directed to Professor Lawrence.
How many questions you have altogether?
6.
So let's see how I structured it. 6.
Yes.
Okay, there's not too many then. Then can you read the next one and see, and then mention the person that is directed to?
Okay, it's directed to Professor Lawrence, and it's from Mr. Samuel. He says, in view of the identified challenges of inclusivity, are you saying that the challenges of exclusion differs from place to place, but same in scope and spread? If this is the case, what do you feel account for intensity of the dimension of exclusion in Africa?
Well, my experience with Africa maybe is not that in-depth, so to speak, to answer this question properly, but I would say that first of all, yes, the state of inclusiveness and standards, they differ from place to place. Although what is very important is that in case of Africa also, but not only Africa, but also in case of Europe, we have to understand that what really matters right now is not economic standing of the real estate project, in example. It's not just providing pure housing for the people who are in need. But what is important is that this matters to have this kind of inclusive cities, but also it matters to have the socially or the social infrastructure, which is important for that. And of course, the standards for that may be different in case of Durban, Johannesburg, Poland, US. I mean, for a number of the different reasons, this can be different. But from my point of view, we have to take them into account, and we have to understand that all those things matter. It's just like with the mass transit, I mean, we all understand that the mass transit is important, although the standards for the mass transit may be just different in Johannesburg and Durban for this or that reason, you know, but they are still there. I mean, the standards and concepts are still there. It's like with sustainable development. We all adopted the concept of the sustainable development, and we were looking for the individual phases of the sustainable development concept, I would say. And now we have to adopt the standards of the social phase of housing, and we have to basically plan for it locally. This would be my point for in this case.
Professor Piot, I think there's one key. I will not come, I'm the chair, I won't come into every aspect of the debate, but there's a key concept in Kasmashof that you presented. Though I lived there many years, I worked there. I know it very well, and I've worked in all those things. But that key concept that was used for Kasmashof is equally, it can be applied. Like the United Nations, we talk about replicability. You can replicate it in many concepts. If I go through those concepts and the strategy behind that Kasmashof, which is negative to what I'm seeing now, is positive in Vienna and most of some of the European countries, but when they come to Africa, it's a total different thing. Kasmashof have a sketch, if we can look at his work, where he draws a ship. It's one of the first inclusive housing in the world that was presented. And in that ship, he said everybody, because in the ship we see very cheap people, very poor people, we see very rich people, you see women, you see men, you see disabled, you see everything. If you look at his drawing, and they say we are all together in it. So therefore, he was looking at those inclusivity of all different races, different level of economy, different level of your education, professor, student, everybody. So there was no discrimination. That is what he's trying to achieve. And then the second concept that I see for that, and that problem, you know, those things came most after Second World War, and then a lot of people are very poor and all those things. He did not want to express the economic level of individual. Rather, he wanted to give an integrated approach that even though you are poor, it will not be read from you. Because in South Africa, I wrote a lot of things on economic segregation, and we talk about racial segregation. You see people are compacted according to their racial, according to their economy, and that is what Kasmashof was dismissed, that he doesn't want it to be in that case. So he put everybody together. Then within the urban context, the architecture, that's where urban design and architecture become very important. An inclusive city is an instrument that we can use to create inclusive city, because we can talk in a planning development framework at a larger scale. And when we implement, we don't implement and in that case, when you look at that building, if you are very poor, if you are coming close to the building, you have a respect, a pride. You believe you have an equality with whoever is in that place, as against what we see in Africa, where the poor will stay in squatter settlement, we have a little tiny houses for them. Immediately in the last scale, the economic segregation is very clear. Now we are not talking of racial segregation now. So that is one concept that I think for inclusivity of cities that can be taken to other places. And if you look at the planning of the city too, because it's not in isolated, that's why we talk of the collaboration of the people. It was located where the train station is, the tram is here, the shopping, and you know the training schools are next to it. And the university is down the bottom. So when you look into those type of
if I can answer to that,
yeah.
If I can answer to that, you know, I think you have brought a very important thing in this whole thing, which means, you know, that we have to think about those two things in combination. You know, on one hand, we have got the social inclusiveness on this, so to speak, on this housing unit level, I would say, okay, and we have to rediscover the social values of the social housing in this particular case. But on the other hand, we have all these things, which I also mentioned in my presentation, which are things associated with the inclusiveness, associated with combination of the different social classes, social groups, and so on, just to fight all these negative things which you have mentioned, right? And this is another thing which is very, very important in that case. And this is maybe a little bit more specific to Africa, but also we have this in Europe, we have this in Vienna, we have this in France, we have this in Germany, where you also got those ghettos, so to speak. I mean, people coming from Turkey and they are living in the Turkish ghetto. People are coming from Poland to Germany, they are living in the Polish ghetto, and so on, right? So this is another level of that. But we have also to understand that, something which is perceived as something very bad from the planning or from the general social policy point of view, on the other hand, pays back, in case when you are living in the lockdown realities and then you have to rely on your friends and family, okay? And this is something which is, it's a very interesting debate and a very interesting interplay, how to play for the city, how to plan for the city, having in mind, on one hand, the need for the social inclusiveness, secondly, for the diversity, which is very important in that case. And I fully agree with you. This is very important to fight racism, to fight all this, class exclusion and all this kind of the thing. It's extremely important because only through this we can produce really sustainable, socially sustainable cities, right? I are fully right about that, no doubt about that, But on the other hand, it's a little bit in contradiction with that what we have been discussing about. And the question is whether we go in future into the social ghettos or whether we go into the social or socially oriented communities, diversified communities, okay? And these things are perceived differently in some parts of Europe and in some parts of Africa because of the different heritage, tradition, history, and so on. But it's definitely on the agenda. It's definitely part of the debate. It should be part of the debate. Sorry for reacting, but
no, it's good. Thank you.
A lot of clarification.
On that note, can we see the next, can we hear the next question, please? I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, we have 10 more minutes, I guess, right?
Yeah, we have enough time. The next question, please.
Okay, the next question is to Professor Lawrence again. Do you think Africa can actually achieve a state of inclusiveness as standard sets requires intensive economic input for infrastructure, which can promote inclusiveness?
Well,
does he have any other questions so that we can bring all his questions together? Because they may be overlapping.
Yeah, but I can see these questions as well, so don't worry. Let me just react very briefly to one by one. I think it's important. I would say it doesn't need extensive infrastructure improvements. I think it needs, rethinking the social structure first of all, and this is very, very important thing. And if we kind of reconceptualize our living environments, many things will come just as they are, basically speaking, right? So it doesn't really require like huge infrastructure spendings for restructuring the whole thing. I think we first have to change the way we think about our social environments and about our cities. And only after that, the physical structures will get adopted, not necessarily at a huge expense.
Next question, please. Or is there anybody who want to ask? Can we finish the question first before we move on to general questions?
Okay, the next question is, can Africa attain inclusiveness with current level of infrastructure? If not, do you think Africa can achieve inclusivity without losing its basic traditional development ingredients?
Well, I don't know maybe very much about Africa. I've been a couple of times over there, so I know a little bit. But I would say from that, what I have seen, I would say, yes, Africa can reach this level of inclusiveness. It just needs to kind of deal maybe slightly differently with the resources which you already have over there. So this would be my answer. But, as I said, I may be perceived as a person from outside, so I not necessarily know about all the peculiarities of those structures. As I said, it's more about the state of mind than the policy than with the hard improvements. Okay.
The next question is from Mr. Samuel again. He says his worry with the changing paradigm is that it tends to remove the cultural values and emotional attachments of people to their communities. He asks, how do you think this can be mitigated?
it should not be mitigated because it doesn't have to be changed. You know, I would say the cultural values and emotional ties are extremely important. And I try to emphasize that we need those things, okay? We need those things, but we need them on the two different levels. You know, on one level, you know, when you are living in your traditional community, in your traditional social environment, you know, it's great because you are attached to these people. But if you are living in the place which is more, so to speak, diversified, you know, you need to rediscover those ties and emotional connections, so to speak, with your community. So I would say we should embrace, you know, those emotional ties and links, you know, to your community. It is extremely important to be there.
Yeah, so that I'll agree with you, and I think, but on the other hand, one also need to. It is good that various cultures can have their place of living because the city is combination of various people living together. It's like unity in diversity. That's what we are saying when you are talking of inclusive city. But having said that, when we are talking of inclusive city, then it should not be that because various cultural groups are living in various areas and there should be a total distinction in terms of the quality, distribution of resources, equitable. It has to be equitable. If I take, for example, that's areas as I've worked in my early days in the 80s. If you look at Palestine and Israel, these are two, is one example I can use. Those are two different groups. And this group, one has a very good thing, the other one doesn't have. Even though they are living, the Jews and the Arabs, when you look at that. So the problem with a cultural something is when the resources are not equally distributed. Infrastructure are not equally implemented. And when all those things happen, then the notion of cultural dimension become a problem as a segregation. So what the argument here, yes, that is important, but you must have, if we are talking of inclusive city, equitable distribution of resources and all amenities. And I think that's not only that, if you go to many European cities, you will see when we talk of migration, people who migrated in those days from the east to the west, and all those things from Turkey to some other African, some other European city, they stay alone in their own little, and there's no much that's what implemented, but there are many cities who have taken account of that and integrated them into the whole host of system. So that's this issue of cultural migration and all those sort of things are the thing that needs to be looked at very, very carefully. It could be positive, which is positive in terms of tourism for the state in inclusivity to bring more people there. On the other hand, it could be negative if there's no equity distribution of resources and wealth of the state. Can we hear the next person, please?
Okay,
the next question.
Okay, we're running out of time a little bit, so we're just going to do one more question.
We're on time. We started late, so I know what I'm doing.
It's
not yet 9. Okay.
Okay, so well, there's 3 more questions, and we can do it.
Yeah, let's finish all the questions.
Okay, that's fine. Again, Professor Lawrence, they're asking, are you suggesting a review of the existing housing policies to accommodate post-pandemic issues?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next question is, how can you relate right to the city and eviction in African cities, and how can it affect inclusiveness?
Well, I would say is that the right to the city is a very important thing, and we have to rediscover the right to the city. I'm not so sure how does it work in practice in case of African cities, but from my experience, it is pretty complicated because of the heritage and because of the traditions and all the heritage of the apartheid and all the other things. You know, it is still there, basically speaking, right? And this right to the city definitely has to be rediscovered, reframed, reshaped, and in both ways. It means it means that everybody, I mean, from both sides or from all the sides, I would say, should have the equal rights to the city. It is very, very, very important. But that also implies a kind of structural changes for the cities. It also implies structural changes for the urban policies, also for the housing policies, I would say. So a kind of breakthrough, I mean, emotional and mental breakthrough has to be done. And we have to understand it's not only just one side, which means that that the people who are underprivileged are not taking over, so to speak. It should be differently. It should be understood that we are all one community and we are all part of the same story. Doesn't matter what is our background and history and where we are coming from. And only then we are able to produce sustainable communities and socially inclusive, really socially inclusive communities.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is from Martin. He asked, does the disposal or sale of city land have the potential to accommodate affordable housing instead of mainly generating an income?
Well, definitely, I would say we have to reframe our, so to speak, liberal approach to the land markets, and this is something which I also mentioned. You know, we have to understand that, of course, economy matters. It is extremely important. Without economy, we are not able to generate, so to speak, sustainable cities. But we have to understand that money is not everything in this case, and that just the profitable land markets is not something which is the only objective for the urban policy. So definitely, yes. I hope I answered that properly.
So if that is the last the question, I just want to add to the right to the city. I think the critical issue of right to city in Africa may be slightly different from the European scenario, or in some cases it may be the same. You see, right to the city, there's a misconception that people believe that when you go to the city, you go and shop, you interact, things that you're not allowed to do at one time, you finish with that, and you back into your dormitory. Dormitory means just a place of sleeping and where you stay. Now, to argue for the right of the city, it means every individual must have a piece of a place in the city to dwell, to actively participate in all action of that city. And that's where the question of land becomes very critical in Africa. I think also in Europe, land is very expensive, but in many cases, that is why you see in some country where development was not allowed to go through, they have to nationalize the land so that the development can be located in any specific area. Not that it has been very successful in some African country, and I think that are the key issue, so that the housing should be in a very strategic places, in the city center, in the area that's closer to infrastructure, social amenities, rather than coming and go. I see those people as visitors in the city. That is my conception of argue against right to the city. Right to city, it means I'm living there, everything that is there. It's not like colonial city, where in the evening, 5 o'clock, everybody disappear, the center of the city become empty. And it's not far-fetched. If you look at the city of Nairobi, it was like that. I remember when I was there in '89, we were fighting to create inner city housing, to create multiple. If you go there now, it could be achieved, provided the land tenure is changed. In Kigali, also is changing, because we changed the whole framework of the planning in the city to allow more development in the city, housing and all those things, and not putting people very far away, especially the poor. Cost a lot of money of infrastructure. So those are those areas of right to the city that we need to look at. So I think it was an interesting presentation.
No, and if I can comment, there is nothing more I can agree with you on that. You know, I mean, I definitely support your point, Professor Ambrose. And also, I would like to say is that we should not only provided the city center is not only the place to work or shop, but also we should have this as a place of the diversified community, and this is also important. So to go even further, we have, and you will be surprised, we have exactly the same problems in Europe, exactly the same problems, maybe slightly different contexts, but the problems are the same.
So thank you very much. I think we've done so well. We started late and we still managed to achieve our destiny. Now, I think if there's no further question or clarification or contribution, I assume so, then can I ask Mr. Zulu to give us a closing remark if there's no further questions. So I would like to give I think Mr. Zulu is around.
Yes, Prof, can I go ahead?
Yes, please. I also need to introduce you briefly, even though everything is already written there. Mr. Zulu is currently working in Nkoyeni municipality. How can I not pronounce your area? I work there all the time. As the head of the Department of Development Planning and Services. Also, at the same time, head of the Department of Strategic Planning and Governance since 2012. Mr. Zulu obtained his Master in Internal and Regional Planning from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he has got almost 19 years of experience in dealing with regional planning and also with the municipal manager. And also I could see here that he has also interacted and worked with various areas of organ of the government. So on that short introduction, I will ask Mr. Zulu to give us a closing remark on what we have been presented.
Thank you, Prof. Thanks, Surgeon Chairperson. Thank you for the great facilitation to the symposium and to get us going. Trust that I'm audible enough. Please indicate if not the case. I would also like to give a special thanks to Prof. Magedimisha Pungu as Saji Chair for the idea of this very important engagement and for taking the lead in putting it together. Chairperson, on behalf of SECPLAN, thanks for the opportunity to say, to participate in the program and to say one or two things in this very important engagement. We're grateful for the partnership and believe such reflective and combined academia and practitioner deliberations, Chair, can only make us wiser in dealing with the issues before us and strengthen our collective response to the challenges that are facing the cities today. And as a result, Chair, and probably especially the South African participants will be fully aware, we saw it fit for Council to recognize the symposium and given its nature and the quality, and gave it a CPD accreditation, so not just to participate but also as part of our CPD program to ensure that this is part of the program, of the CPD program that we have, and maximum 20 points for full attendance in the symposium. Chair, maybe just to say the 21st century is definitely has shown us across disciplines that there is no discipline that has sound response to any of the challenges alone, but we need collaborative, multidisciplinary approach. Inclusive cities is one such concept that recognizes and provides for such an approach. And no doubt, it has been said a lot, this is more of a need, and there is more of a space for it in the case of South Africa as one example. And as already yourself, Chair, and the speakers have hinted, across the world, but in particular the colonized states, I'm sure they will have a more focus or need for this. And development states in such, maybe let me say development in such states has been quite exclusionary, both in special form as well as access to opportunities. Again, this has been underlined since this morning. And the reality is that the geopolitics we operate within influences the extent to which each state and each city can respond in policy and otherwise. So it is, the geopolitics is quite restrictive and simply because there are bigger agendas to achieve, bigger agendas to protect. So there are limitations within what the different disciplines are able to do. And I think over the years across the globe, as the guest speaker was indicating, there's been an evidence of this. So surely the war to ensure inclusive cities is not an easy one. However, as practitioners on the ground, we dare not give up, and no matter how tempting this can be. The issues before us are quite dynamic, quite fluid, quite challenging. They can become heavy and drain us to not have hope to bring about any meaningful change. I think the IDP experience in the case of South Africa that we've spoken about, particularly Dr. Munsame and Mr. Mbanga, is a classical example of such struggles that one is talking about. Chair, the speakers already in the session have spoken in some details regarding these challenges, and no doubt there will be more detailed arguments on this as the symposium unfolds until Wednesday. Let us be reminded, Chair, we are professionals and our professional bodies expect of us to always act professionally at all times, to act in the interest of humanity, the public and environment, and to act with honesty and sincerity and integrity at all times. And therefore, giving up is obviously not an option. Again, lastly, Chair, probably the COVID-19 pandemic, as Prof. Lawrence has somewhat suggested, might be giving us a great opportunity to re-engineer the land use management principles that we apply for our cities. With those few words, Chair, we would like to thank you, thank all the speakers, thank Prof. Lawrence, thanks Mr. Mbanga, thanks Dr. Munsami, and thanks the Prof. Makidemisha Chipungu, and thanks to everyone that has made an input for your insightful inputs, which have, I believe, brilliantly set the tone and triggered even more interest in the symposium. Thank you, Chair.
Professor Adebayo, you're muted. Professor Adebayo, you're muted.
Durban is missing you. Let's take this time to recharge. Durban is waiting to welcome you after lockdown. Be energized by the ocean, beach, and bush. Discover Durban's adventures and tranquility. Play on the promenade and put the fun back in your life. Enjoy a township experience. Do the Inanda Heritage Trail. Explore Durban's cultural diversity. Stay at home and plan to create new memories. Visit Durban online. Durban's warm hospitality awaits you.
So I think this is the end of the session of the plenary, and we'll be moving into the other rooms. Please don't forget to don't forget the links to your rooms, and that will be distributed to you after this plenary section. So thank you everybody for coming and for participating. It was a very good section, and also the picture of Durban tried to highlight what you will see if you are to be here physically, maybe in the near future. We will welcome you back to Durban. Thank you very much. God bless.